It was one of those heavy gray mornings in the heart of the city, where the buildings felt too tall and the sky seemed reluctant to break. Rain from the night before still clung to the sidewalks in shimmering puddles, reflecting bits of a sun too shy to shine. Nara, a soft-spoken girl in her early 20s, walked briskly along the edge of the street, her steps light but firm, almost as if she didn't want the world to notice she was there. She had been working as a janitor at Estrella Mall since she was 18. 4 years of the same scuffed floors, flickering lights, and the scent of lemon-scented cleaner that clung to her fingers long after her shift ended. But this morning felt off, like something was about to tilt. As she neared the mall's grand entrance, a sleek black luxury car slowed behind her. Nara barely glanced over her shoulder. She was used to being overlooked, walked past, talked over. But the roar of the engine stayed with her a second too long. Behind the tinted window sat Rafaela, a rich, camera-addicted influencer known for flaunting designer handbags, curated perfection, and a piercing laugh that echoed through social media like glass breaking. She held a phone in one hand and the steering wheel in the other, her eyes briefly catching sight of Nara's modest figure. Then, without a word, she pressed the accelerator. The tire screeched against the slick asphalt. A puddle exploded beside the curb like a grenade of muddy water, and Nara took the full hit. Cold, dirty liquid drenched her from the legs up to her face. She froze. The world stopped. Then came the sound. Laughter. Not just any laugh. Rafaela's loud, mocking cackle shooting out from the open car window like a slap. "If you're gonna clean floors, better learn to clean yourself first, sweetheart." The words struck harder than the water. Nara blinked, stunned, her breath catching in her throat as the luxury car zipped away like nothing happened. Her once clean uniform clung to her frame, stained with filth and shame. Pedestrians slowed but kept moving. Some pitied her, none intervened. Nara didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't let her knees give in to the weight of public humiliation. Slowly she reached into her pocket, pulled out a worn hand towel, and wiped the grime from her face. Her hands trembled, but her back stayed straight. Then she walked through the glass doors and went to work, silent, soaking wet, but unbroken. What she didn't know was that someone had seen it all. Across the street, seated behind the foggy window of a quiet coffee shop, was Leo, a man in his mid-30s with a calm demeanor and eyes that missed nothing. He was the owner of several major buildings in that district, including Estrella Mall. He had been sipping his usual black coffee when Rafaela's car screeched by. He saw her smirk. He saw Nara stand frozen in silence, and something inside him shifted. There was something in Nara's silence, her refusal to break, that reminded him of someone long gone, his late mother. She, too, had scrubbed floors so he could sit in classrooms. She, too, had endured cruelty without complaint, without losing her dignity. Without a second thought, Leo rose from his seat, handed a hot sandwich and a bill to the bartender. "Give this to the cleaner who just walked into the mall," he said quietly. The bartender blinked. "No name? Just give it to her." Later that day, Nara found the sandwich waiting in the staff break room. No note, no explanation, just a warm meal and a tiny folded card that simply read, "Keep going. Someone sees you." She stared at the note for a long time before taking a small bite. It was the first warmth she'd felt all day, and it wouldn't be the last. In the weeks that followed, small, thoughtful things began to appear. A brand new pair of insulated gloves in her locker, a notebook filled with encouraging words, a hot drink resting beside her cleaning cart on especially cold mornings. There was never a name, never a clue, but each gift felt like a whisper in the dark. "You matter." Nara kept working, harder, longer. Her spirit glowed in the shine of every floor she polished. She arrived early, stayed late, and never once complained. Her supervisors began to notice. So did her coworkers, but not all reactions were kind. Whispers crept in. He must be dating someone upstairs. Maybe she's sucking up to management. She didn't earn this. Jealousy began to stir, especially among those who'd been there longer. One day, someone even tampered with her cleaning log to make it look like she'd skipped an entire floor. When confronted, Nara didn't panic. She calmly presented her notebook with detailed notes and timestamps, then offered to redo the task without protest. Her grace cut through the rumors like sunlight through fog. The resentment didn't disappear, but it dulled into reluctant respect. Then came the letter. One ordinary afternoon, after mopping the last aisle of the food court, Nara was called into the break room. A sealed envelope waited for her on the table, not company branded, heavy, embossed. Inside was an acceptance letter, an offer of a full-ride scholarship to study hotel management at one of the country's top institutions. No sender's name, just one handwritten line at the bottom. Your future is worth more than just mopping floors. I believe in you. Her fingers trembled. Tears blurred her vision. For the first time in what felt like years, Nara let herself feel something more than duty. She felt seen, and she felt hope. Unbeknownst to her, Leo had orchestrated every moment, every glove, every note, every opportunity, a quiet architect of her second chance. Weeks passed. Nara began attending night classes while still working full-time during the day. Her muscles ached, her eyes burned, but her spirit, it soared. Each shift felt like one step closer to the life she'd only dared to dream about. She never boasted, never slowed down, just worked, studied, believed. But not everyone wanted her to rise. What Nara didn't know was that the moment Rafaela drenched her in dirty water that morning had been caught on camera, and the real storm was just beginning. What Rafaela never expected was that a security camera mounted high above Estrella Mall's main entrance had captured it all. Though the footage was grainy and Nara's face wasn't fully visible, the video spoke volumes. The luxury car, the spinning tires, the explosive puddle, the shriek of laughter. Someone from inside the building leaked the footage anonymously, and just like a match dropped on dry leaves, the clip ignited the internet. It first surfaced on a local gossip page with the caption, "Influencer splashes made in luxury drive-by." Then it spread fast and mercilessly. Within hours the video had gone viral. What once was glamour quickly became scandal. Rafaela, the queen of filters, fashion halls, and faux empathy, was suddenly the face of cruelty. Headlines screamed, "Rich influencer humiliates janitor." Social feeds erupted with outrage. Posts poured in, not of admiration, but of condemnation. And while Nara quietly arrived at work, unaware of the digital wildfire she had unknowingly sparked, Rafaela was spiraling. Her phone buzzed with notifications, thousands of them. Comments turned vicious, endorsements were pulled, her curated image, once untouchable, began to unravel. In desperation, Rafaela released a statement on Instagram, trying to brush it off. It was just a joke. People are way too sensitive these days. But the public wasn't buying it. Old screenshots resurfaced. Past DMs, group chats where she mocked low-class workers, audio clips of snide remarks. The truth was bleeding through her polished facade, and it was ugly. Then came the call from her father. A commanding man with deep pockets and an empire built on public perception, he didn't just scold her, he dismantled her. "You've humiliated this family," he said coldly. He froze her credit cards, revoked her media access, and wiped her social accounts clean. She had two choices: apologize publicly or lose everything. Back at the mall, Nara stayed grounded. She kept cleaning. She kept studying. She kept moving forward, one quiet act of grace at a time. Her supervisors began to notice more than just her dedication. They saw something shift: confidence, leadership, a gentle strength that lifted everyone around her. She had become more than a worker. She had become a light. Then came the moment that changed everything. Nara was promoted to the VIP floor, the most prestigious level of Estrella Mall. Only the wealthiest clients and top executives ever set foot there. The uniforms were different, tailored. The air smelled cleaner. It was more than a new floor. It was a new world. Standing in the employee restroom, Nara adjusted her upgraded uniform in the mirror. She looked taller, calmer, like someone who had found her place. She didn't know it yet, but the promotion had been personally approved by Leo Costa. For months, Leo had observed her from a distance. He never introduced himself, never interfered, but he had watched her rise with quiet reverence. Her humility reminded him of everything good in a world obsessed with image. That afternoon, as she returned to the staff lockers, Nara found something wedged beneath her locker door, a plain envelope. Inside, a letter written by hand. "You've inspired me more than you'll ever know. You are not alone. Someone believes in you." Signed, Leo Costa. Nara read it again and again. At first, the name meant nothing. Then a memory surfaced. An old magazine left in the break room, a profile on the country's youngest billionaire, Leo Costa, owner of Estrella Mall. Her hands shook. The gloves, the notebook, the hot drinks, the scholarship. It had been him. A man with the power to overlook her had instead chosen to uplift her. The tears came then, not of sorrow but of sheer gratitude. All this time, she thought she'd been walking the path alone. She hadn't been. The next morning, Nara arrived early, almost floating. Sleep had evaded her, but clarity hadn't. Leo's belief in her wrapped around her like armor. Not a handout, not pity, but faith. Genuine, quiet faith. She stepped onto the VIP floor, her head held high. And then she noticed something odd. People were watching her, not with disdain, not with pity, but with curiosity and warmth. Some even smiled. In the staff lounge, a small crowd had gathered around a phone. Whispers filled the air. Nara approached slowly. On the screen was a live video. It was Rafaela. But this wasn't the glossy, filtered Rafaela. She wore no makeup, just a simple white blouse. She stood beside her stern-faced father. Her voice trembled, not with performance, but with something closer to remorse. "I want to apologize publicly," she said, facing the camera. "To the young woman I humiliated. I'm sorry." Rafaela's voice trembled through the screen. "What I did was cruel. It was immature. I offer my most sincere apology." Nara couldn't breathe. She wasn't looking at the same woman who had laughed through the window of a luxury car weeks ago. This Rafaela looked small, defeated. Her eyes were red, her shoulders drawn in. Behind her stood her father, arms crossed, jaw tight, making it clear this apology wasn't optional. Then came the moment that stopped Nara cold. "She has a name," Rafaela continued, voice cracking. "Her name is Nara. I've tried to reach her, but she hasn't responded, and I understand why. I only hope that one day she can forgive me." The video fell into silence. Then came the flood of comments. "It's about time. Where's Nara? We want to hear her side." The spotlight had shifted. Again. Nara stepped away from the phone. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She didn't want fame. She didn't want revenge, she only wanted peace. But the world had other plans. By lunchtime, her phone was buzzing with messages from coworkers, strangers, journalists. Everyone wanted her response. But Nara stayed silent. Until that evening, when a new message arrived. From Leo? It simply said, "Find me. Come as you are." No pressure. No expectations. Just an invitation. By 6 o'clock, Nara stood at the place where it all began. The sidewalk had long since dried. The puddle was gone, but the memory lingered. And there was Leo, waiting beside a black car, polished and still, not unlike Rafaela's, but this time it brought no fear, just calm. He raised a hand in greeting. His voice was soft. "You handled everything with grace," he said, "more than most would have." Nara stared at him, unsure of what to say. "I never meant for any of this to happen," she whispered. "I know," he replied gently. "That's what makes you different." He reached into his coat and handed her a small envelope. Inside was a key and a letter. "This is your graduation gift from the scholarship fund," he said. "A furnished apartment near campus. No more long commutes. You deserve comfort. You deserve peace." Tears filled her eyes. "Well, me?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Leo smiled softly. "Because sometimes," he said, "the strongest people wear the simplest uniforms. You remind me of who I used to want to become, not who I became." From that day on, their bond evolved. What had begun as silent support became visible admiration. Leo became her mentor, her confidant, and slowly, something more. Over the next year, Nara excelled. She graduated with honors and was quickly promoted to Director of Professional Hospitality Training at the Estrella Business Center. Her story began to quietly ripple through the company, an unspoken legend of humility, strength, and transformation. Rafaela faded into obscurity. Her brand never recovered. People saw through her now. Without authenticity, her empire of influence crumbled. 1 year later, to the day, Estrella Mall hosted its annual Excellence in Service Gala. Nara stood on stage in a sleek black gown, accepting the award for outstanding contribution to guest experience. The lights glowed, cameras flashed, but her words stole the night. "I used to believe that life was about survival," she began, her voice steady, "just making it through what's thrown at you. But I've learned something. Sometimes the mud you walk through leads you to a light you never knew you deserved." The room held its breath. She looked out over the audience. Leo was seated in the front row, smiling with quiet pride. After the ceremony, they walked side by side toward the main entrance, the same place it had all started. Nara stopped. She reached up, removed the satin award ribbon from around her neck, and gently placed it on the edge of the planter near the doors. Not as a trophy, not as a symbol of revenge, but as a parting gift to the version of herself that had once walked in soaked and silent. Sometimes the world tries to bury you, but if you keep walking, through shame, through judgment, through mud, someone will see you, and when they do, you shine. As Nara stepped away from the mall's glass doors, leaving behind the ribbon she once wore with pride, she didn't feel like she was closing a chapter. She felt like she was stepping into a fuller version of herself. The ribbon wasn't a symbol of victory over Rafaela or even the trials of her past. It was a quiet offering to the person she used to be. The girl who walked through mud with no one at her side, the woman who now walked with peace, not because the world had changed, but because she had. In the months that followed, Nara's name was no longer whispered behind break room walls. It began to appear in conversations about leadership, integrity, and resilience. She didn't chase fame, but her story traveled on its own. It found its way into community workshops, local magazines, and quiet thank you notes left by young workers who finally believed they could become something more. With Leo's support and her own unshakable will, Nara launched a small initiative that blossomed into a program called the Radiant Path. It offered hands-on training in hospitality for low-income youth, not just to teach them job skills, but to instill in them the belief that they belonged. She sat through every class, shared her story without drama or grandeur, and taught from experience that self-worth isn't granted. It's realized. Dozens of young people passed through her program that year. Some came timid, others angry at the world, but all of them left with a little more light in their eyes. Her relationship with Leo unfolded like the rest of her life, steady, grounded, and without spectacle. They never announced what they were to each other. They simply were. They worked together, read together, disagreed sometimes, laughed often. He told her she reminded him of the person he once hoped to be. She told him he had helped her become the person she didn't know she could become. In quiet moments, they would sit without speaking, and the silence between them felt like home. Rafaela, on the other hand, vanished from headlines just as swiftly as she had once dominated them. Her apology had been sincere, but the consequences were lasting. Her father withdrew her from public life and from the world of glossy endorsements she had once ruled. She left the city and, as some later heard, began working in a small flower shop where no one knew her name. She never returned to the spotlight, but one day a bouquet of wildflowers arrived at Nara's training center. There was no note, just petals and maybe a small piece of grace. For Nara, the journey didn't end with a promotion or an award. It continued in the lives she touched, in the custodians who now walked with straighter backs, in the students who dared to apply for jobs they once felt unworthy of. She became a quiet legend, not because she asked to be, but because she had walked through fire without losing her tenderness. What stayed with people wasn't just what happened to Nara, but how she responded. She had every reason to strike back, to lash out, to demand justice. But she chose presence over performance, strength over spectacle. Where others might have shouted, she whispered truth through her actions. And in doing so, she reminded everyone watching that the loudest kind of power doesn't always make noise. In a world that sometimes mistakes cruelty for confidence and arrogance for strength, Nara's story became a soft rebellion, proof that humility is not weakness, that service is not shameful, and that quiet kindness can ripple through an entire city. She had once believed that life was nothing more than surviving whatever the world threw at her. But now she understood something deeper, that sometimes the places meant to break us are the very places we begin to bloom, that even mud can carry the seeds of light, and that no matter where you begin, your worth is never determined by your title, your paycheck, or the clothes you wear, but by the way you carry yourself when no one claps. As she looked at her reflection days later, no ribbon, no ceremony, just herself, Nara smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because she had become someone she could respect. And that was enough. If this story touched your heart, then hold on to it. Let it remind you that goodness still matters, that resilience still inspires, and that behind every uniform, every mop, every tired pair of hands, there might be someone quietly changing the world, one step, one act, one soul at a time. As the applause from the award ceremony faded into memory and the lights of the Estrella Mall dimmed behind them, Nara and Leo stood at the threshold of something unspoken. The mall's grand entrance, once a place of humiliation and beginning, had now become a quiet marker of transformation. She had walked through those glass doors soaked in dirty water and silence, and now, a year later, She stepped away in elegance and recognition. But the truest change had never been in how others saw her. It was in how she saw herself. In the weeks that followed, life didn't slow down, it deepened. There were no grand headlines, no viral posts, just the steady rhythm of meaning being lived out, day by day. Nara returned to her new role not with pride, but with purpose. Her office was modest, tucked beside the training floor where new recruits came in every Monday morning. On her desk sat a single framed photo, not of herself, but of her mother, hands calloused, eyes kind, standing beside a mop bucket that looked much like the one Nara had once used. Below it, a quote handwritten by Nara, "From her strength I rise." The Radiant Path program she had helped found was entering its second year, and the waiting list had grown long. But what set the program apart wasn't just its access or its curriculum, it was the way Nara personally mentored each student. She remembered every name, remembered whose mother worked nights, whose shoes were falling apart, who hadn't eaten that morning. She didn't just teach them hospitality, she gave them back their sense of worth. Leo continued to support the initiative, but never as a figurehead. He sat in the back during workshops, quietly observing. He often stayed behind after the others had left, just to ask the trainees, what would make this better for you? It wasn't about efficiency for him, it was about listening. And in those moments, when Nara caught him kneeling beside a student, notebook in hand, she saw the version of him few people knew, not the billionaire in glossy magazines, but the boy whose mother once scrubbed floors so he could dream. Their relationship continued like the rest of their lives, without fanfare. They didn't put labels on what they were. Sometimes they were friends, other times creative partners. There were quiet dinners in city cafes where no one knew who they were. There were drives to nowhere with the windows down, her laugh mixing with the wind. One evening, they sat together beneath an old tree in the park, watching children run through the fountain. Leo turned to her and said, "You know, the most powerful moment in your whole story wasn't when you got the scholarship or the award. It was when you stood there, dripping wet, and refused to bow your head." Nara didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her hand found his, fingers interlacing without question, the kind of gesture that speaks without speaking. And yet, life, as it always does, kept testing them. The mall underwent a change in leadership after a new board of directors came into play. Not everyone was thrilled with the growing attention Nara's program received. Some executives questioned the return on investment. One man even told Leo in a closed-door meeting, "It's a great story, but this is a business, not a charity." Nara heard the whispers, knew the risks, but she didn't flinch. She met with every board member one by one, not to defend herself, but to tell them the stories of the lives transformed. The girl who escaped homelessness through a front desk job, the young man who now managed a luxury resort after being told he'd never be more than a cleaner. She spoke with conviction, not performance. And slowly the tide turned. The same executives who once doubted her began attending her program's graduation ceremonies. They saw the pride in the eyes of students whose names had never been called before, and one by one, they stopped seeing it as charity and started seeing it as legacy. Through it all, Nara never stopped remembering who she was. On the anniversary of the puddle incident, she hosted a small private gathering not to mark a moment of shame, but to reclaim it. She invited every staff member who had ever been overlooked, underpaid, or disrespected. No dress code, no speeches, just music, food, and laughter. Leo watched from the edge of the room, sipping a cup of ginger tea, smiling at the way Nara moved through the crowd, not above anyone, but among them. Later that night, as they walked home under a sky scattered with stars, Leo asked, "Do you ever wish it hadn't happened, that day with Rafaela?" Nara thought for a long moment. "I wish it hadn't hurt, but I don't wish it away. Sometimes the pain is the seed." Leo nodded. "And you've grown a forest?" What neither of them said aloud was how much that pain had taught them both. That dignity, once lost, can be reclaimed. That forgiveness, when real, doesn't erase the past, but softens its grip. And that healing, while personal, becomes exponential when it's shared. Rafaela's name was rarely spoken anymore. But, in some corners of the internet, a quiet transformation had been noted. She had started writing under a pseudonym, short essays about shame, silence, and starting over. One piece, titled "When the Mirror Breaks," ended with the line, "I thought I was the center of every story, until I realized the world doesn't need more main characters, it needs more humans." Nara read the piece one evening while sipping chamomile tea by the window. She didn't say anything, but she saved the link. Time passed, as it always does. Seasons turned, new faces joined the program. The Estrella Mall began to be known less for luxury brands and more for its community initiatives. And through it all, Nara continued to walk her path, not for applause, not for headlines, but because it was hers to walk. Her story, in its quiet arc, reminded everyone who crossed her path of a truth often forgotten, that the measure of a person is not what they endure, but how they rise afterward. That the deepest power lies not in commanding attention, but in commanding respect. And that the simplest acts, a sandwich left in a break room, a letter slipped under a locker door, can alter the trajectory of a life. As for Leo, he changed too. Being near Nara softened the sharper edges of his world. He began to visit his properties not with an eye for profit, but with questions like, how do the people here feel? He launched an internal program for invisible workers, cleaners, security guards, cafeteria staff, to share ideas with executives. And he made it a point to speak their names at meetings. Not titles, names. One winter evening, as they watched the snow fall outside his penthouse window, Leo turned to Nara and said, "You've made me believe in slow miracles." She smiled, the kind that don't need magic, just mercy. And maybe that was the final lesson, that mercy, not given from above, but offered eye to eye, is the foundation of all true change. That real love, whether romantic or humanistic, begins when one person dares to see another not as a role or a burden or a problem to fix, but as a soul worthy of rising. Nara didn't need to be famous. She didn't need to be remembered in headlines or honored in plaques. Her legacy was written every time someone less visible stood up a little taller, every time someone who had been dismissed felt, even for a moment, like they mattered. Because they did. Because she had shown them how. And as long as someone somewhere wipes off the mud and keeps walking, her light, quietly, magnificently, will go on shining.